WOTC and in general other tabletop role-playing game companies are not quote-unquote woke. They don't inherently care about diversity, inclusivity, and or equity, and I think instead, like with any other business, make these decisions because it is first and foremost profit-driven. This is not to say that individuals, especially Black and Brown and many other marginalized folks and people, don't benefit from joining these companies or join these companies because they have a passion in their specific industry. I also don't blame Black, queer, trans, and other marginalized folks for joining ERG groups or affinity groups either. These are necessary groups and I think they are important. Rather, DEI services are generally not a primary objective, especially if it hurts the company's profit margins despite the company acting like it cares via adverts, marketing, or collaborating with marginalized people. This will touch on why some communities in TTRPG spaces, namely the right wing and centrist spaces, label these companies as woke, and what incentive might they have to do this. This will also include a discussion on the etymology of the word woke and how it's changed drastically and has been co-opted in 2020s. My hope in this video is twofold. I want to firstly inform you on why we should be risk adverse to any tabletop RPG company or any company overall that touts itself as inclusive. Secondly, I hope to put tabletop RPGs like D&D in the broader context of other mega companies and how these companies reflect some of the changes we are seeing with the loss of DEI services and companies failing us multiple times. Now, this video is not an entire roast or drama piece on WOTC. I don't mean any bad will from WOTC or any other company mentioned. Rather, I want to help create a tabletop RPG space and community that can meet the material, emotional, and physical needs of all people who participate. Another point, this video is not inviting you or anyone else to harass anyone or anything mentioned on this video. Please do not do this. With that said, enough of the preamble. Let's dive in on why I think most companies, and specifically tabletop RPG companies like Dungeons and Dragons, are not woke. The word woke is heard all the time on the internet. You can go on any forum, on any Reddit post, on any blog post, on Twitter, YouTube. It is thrown around everywhere. And it's lost its original meaning, I think. It is used nowadays in and around internet spaces primarily, as Vox says, a denigration of leftist culture by the right, while also being a term for being politically left in any way. It is a term that both can or was prescribed to socially left politics, but is used by right-wing and centrists too, denigrating them as not being left. For instance, Kat Young states, "These shifting terms invariably become targets of left-wing ridicule as well as right-wing misuse. So that, for instance, any condemnation of actual bigotry is mocked as, open quote, political correctness, social justice warriorism, etc." The word woke originally and historically revolved around Black consciousness, not inherently leftist politics or right-wing denigration or anything like that. Marcus Garvey is one of the first quote-unquote people to use the related terms of wake up or alert in context to Black consciousness. Marcus Garvey is a Pan-Africanist and philosopher who called on Black folk across the globe to be aware of white supremacy and racialized anti-Black violence. He states in his book, Philosophy and Opinions on Marcus Garvey, "Wake up Ethiopia, wake up Africa. Let us work towards the one glorious end of a free, redeemed, and mighty nation. Let Africa be a bright star amongst the constellations of nations." Moving on, Bijan C. Bain writes how the coinage may have come from the Nation of Islam as well. Black Americans in the 1930s were in a state of mental sleeping that could be remedied by spiritual awakening and enlightenment, aka this would free us from our chains and wake us up from the violence we experience every day. And I know this sounds like hotep nonsense, but for the sake of this, just hear me out. This isn't so much about the concept of the Nation of Islam. Rather, this is about how the word woke or awareness was used in relation to Black consciousness, even if there is a spiritual lens, which is a characteristic that you'll see with MLK and others as we move forward. Now, in an article by the National Museum of African American History and Culture, they state, This, racial segregation, slavery, and oppression, is the same way Black folk have been treated all their lives in that part of the country. Of course, you won't care for the society if you wake up and learn just who you really are. Moving to 1938, the phrase "stay woke" comes into a song. It is heard in a 1938 song, Scottsboro Boys, by blues musician Huddie Ledbetter, aka Lead Belly. The song refers to the 1931 Scottsboro incident, where a group of 9 black teenagers in Scottsboro, Arkansas, were accused of SA to 2 white women. Leadbelly uses the term to advise black folk to be careful, to best stay woke, keep their eyes open, since white supremacist violence was common during then. Moving on to 1940s, J. Saunders Redding was the first black professor in an Ivy League. He graduated and then taught at Brown University. He talks about an awakening process amongst poor black folk and growing uneasiness amongst workers, especially poor white workers. He writes in 1943 to The Atlantic about this. It should be no secret, even to the reactionary, that the black person's awakening is also the depressed white man's awakening. The depressed white man in the South is awakening only to discover that both he and black folk were drugged by the same mythical potion of hate, of race struggle, of playing poor laboring black against poor laboring white. He's discovering also that there's much to join him to the black person. Moving to 1959, MLK delivered a speech to graduates at Morehouse College, literally titled "Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution." Note my point on the spirituality. The spirituality and staying aware and staying quote-unquote woke has kept the constant trend to be black consciousness. And to solidify my point for the 1900s, black novelist William Melvin Kelly wrote about the term woke. He writes that black folk have created idioms, phrases, and words around our experiences historically. These terms are absorbed into common vocabulary of Americans, and black folk create new lexicon because of 3 specific reasons. 1. Environment. You're bound to speak a certain way or have a specific accent and lexicon due to geography. That's kind of obvious. Security. When you are around a safe space, you are likely to speak differently. In modern times, you would call that code switching. Black kids, black adults, black academics, whoever you're talking to, growing up in the United States or just in North America or really even anywhere, are expected to switch between AAVE and standard English. Thirdly is black pride and or ownership. This is where black folk have pride over their lexicon, over their language, and will at some point gatekeep it and or keep it to themselves until it's claimed by others. And this logic applies to the word woke. It has a geographic context, was used to mean a specific experience and related to black folks' safety and awareness around white supremacist violence. It is also a lingo to represent black pride and black consciousness. Thus, carrying this from the 1960s, 70s into 2008. Georgia Ann Muldrow heard the term used in 60s jazz music. She used the term "stay woke" in an unreleased version of Master Teacher. Master Teacher was widely recognized by Erykah Badu as one of her most popular songs. And in the updated version that she sang, she stated the words "stay woke." From there, the phrase was used in the budding age of social media, and especially during and after the Ferguson protests of 2014. Moving on, Childish Gambino's popular 2016 song "Redbone" was built around the refrain "stay woke." We have movies that are framed around that. Remember Get Out? So, ranging from that long history, starting all the way back in the 1920s to even now, we can see that the term woke was, firstly, made and created by Black Americans to be keenly aware of racial, social, and economic injustice happening to us. I'm also sure the word was used by Black folk outside of the Americas, but I don't have much information on that, so let me know if there actually is people talking about that kind of research. Let me know in the comment section. Anyhow, secondly, it has a clear long history, and only recently in the past 5 years has the term woke been changed to pretty much mean a quote-unquote phony show of progressive activism that folks on the right and center could use to label anything and anyone seemingly progressive. This context and history is important because to know the word woke's origin is kind of telling. The word is now applied to anything moderately, barely liberal / progressive, despite it being originally for specific circumstances related to Black folks' experience of racism. And this isn't to say that words can't change or don't change over time via the changing of culture, politics, and economics. Rather, it's interesting to see how it's now being used in every single way that it was never intended to be used. We're in 2025, and the term woke, while it does technically maintain its original definition, it is not used nearly ever to mean that. It is used to point out someone or something that is progressive, and signals to the person that used it, usually a centrist or a conservative, of their own political standing and disdain for the person and/or topic. Merriam-Webster's second definition even states, it is a politically liberal or progressive, as in matters of race and/or social justice, especially in a way that is considered unreasonable or extreme. And the term woke is applied broadly to a number of fields. The US military is woke. US military leaders are concerned about a list of senior officers found on a list for being, open quotes, woke. Many of these people are on the list for giving speeches, presentations, or talks about DEI, equity, or inclusivity while serving for the US military. Google is woke as well. In February of 2024, Gemini AI received a lot of criticism for its anti-white bias. Multiple reports stated the AI was producing images of historically accurate figures who weren't historically accurate. They were creating art, and I make an emphasis on quote-unquote art, and this art were making historical figures ethnically and racially diverse, aka George Washington was a Black person or something along those lines. Some right-wing commentators stated that Google's AI is an anti-white lunatic. In December 2024, Google sparked controversy over its new Christmas advertisement featuring gender-fluid beauty influencer Cyrus Vesey. In March 2023, Miller Lite was criticized for being woke, and a satirical ad ran during Women's History Month. The ad featured actor and comedian Ilana Glazer. She discussed the beer company's depiction of women in the past while advertising the brand specific to an audience that cared about Women's History Month. Molson Coors, which owns multiple alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages, like Miller Lite, defend the Miller Lite Women's History ad. Bud Light received backlash as well. Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer, was sent a handful of beers as part of paid sponsorship and promotion for a sweepstakes challenge in 2023. Mulvaney promoted the beer brand commemorating March Madness, which led to a huge fervent of right-wing backlash. This resulted in 2023 with Bud Light taking a temporary hit in sales and, well, unfortunate and obvious transphobia that Mulvaney received. In terms of movies in the past few years, in 2022, Amazon's Ring of Power was heavily review-bombed. The complaints ranged. Some folks were annoyed about the show depicting black elves, dwarves, and humans in this adaptation. There was also some people having issues with Harfoots having Irish/English country accents, amongst many other complaints. There's also a lot of bigoted backlash to The Little Mermaid in 2022 in the States and abroad, with negligible revenue from international audiences like China and South Korea, if I'm correct. In terms of video games, there are a number of controversies / culture war nonsense. Dragon Age Veilguard dealt with it in its initial release. The Last of Us 2 back in 2020 had a huge anti-woke culture war pushback. Sam White, a GQ Games columnist, writes about the game's success despite it being review bombed to smithereens. The Last of Us Part 2 might have sold 4 million copies in the first week and sold over 10 million since 2022, becoming PlayStation's fastest selling exclusive ever, but has attracted review bombers on an epic scale. The anger has come about because, spoiler alert, Naughty Dog dared to kill off the protagonist of the first game, not to mention have the gall to represent women, lesbians, trans people, and black people. This is something Naughty Dog pushes for in its games, because ultimately it leads to better stories, Bruckman told us. And on that note, moving from video games, there are lots of terms for woke individuals amongst the anti-woke. Let me give you a list of some of them I could find. Woke scold, wokeness, wokeism, wokies, woketopians, okay, wokemons I saw on Reddit, and the word has been attached to other words as well, making it an adjective. Woke mob, woke left, woke OSR, woke mind virus. And beyond that, the culture wars has affected most, if not all, of our hobbies in some way. For example, some hobbies like exercising, books, camping, cars, farming, sign language, voice acting, and Jesus Gary freaking Gygax Christ, computer software. I would be here forever if I listed every single hobby or every single word. There are new ones being created right now as I speak, probably, but I think you get my point. The term woke has been co-opted to be used as a designator for anything progressive, even when it's made from the US military or companies. Unfortunately, this also happens in tabletop RPG spaces. Some people call Dungeons and Dragons and other companies woke. Specifically, right-wing and such as grifters and others have existed for quite some time in this space and use terminology like woke to describe a particular game or group. Some people who are on the right are straight up banned from being talked about, like Zach S. and Alexandra Macris. Snow, she covers the alt-right in tabletop games extensively, and I'm not going to cover too much on those topics since she's done a great job on that. So I'll have that video and many of the other resources that I mentioned down below in the description box. I will talk about the terms that I've seen. For instance, there's a reason the term woke OSR or woke SR bring up specific meme pages on Reddit or Kotaku in action. It is either folks in the community wanting to avoid the anti-woke crowd and make fun of them, or the anti-woke crowd themselves using the terms in a serious matter. For example, Kotaku in action specifically has discussed wokeness in tabletop role-playing games since that Reddit page is a main hub for Gamergate on Reddit. So its politics and anti-woke rhetoric are built into that Reddit page's very fabric. And as we all know, Gamergate was not friendly to any woman, femme, or black person in the 2010s. There's also the well-known Tabletop Guide to Woke Companies list. This details on a scale from green to red which companies are not woke to ones that are fully woke. Green is not engaged in any known anti-consumer behavior and generally have remained apolitical. Yellow are entities in this section that have engaged in some questionable behavior, taken a political stance that may have alienated some customers, or preached in their product. Entities here have not caused any harm or engaged any anti-consumer behavior. Red are entities who are categorized as red may have engaged in anti-consumer behavior, deceptive business practices, interfered with other creators, or taken a strong political stance, or alienated large portions of potential customers. This also includes actual racist or sexist entities. Now, I'm very skeptical of that list, and I quite frankly find this list to be ridiculous. I mean, Goodman Games is in the red, and Evil Hat's in the red. This list is fucking stupid. This shit's stupid. It's fucking ridiculous. And while I think it's entirely ridiculous to call these companies woke, and I can't believe I'm saying this, and I know this is the premise of the video, agree, open quotes, with them. And it needs to be very clear. Fuck the alt-right. Fuck bigots, and fuck assholes in the tabletop role-playing game, video game, and any other hobby they stay in that align themselves with those philosophies, politics, and ideals. Homophobia, transphobia, racism, and other bigotry, and aligning yourself with bigots is not smart, practical, and quite frankly, I will never respect. I will never get along with them, and I'm okay with making that stance and it affecting me in whatever way that does. I don't like or appreciate anyone trying to play both sides or the no politics gambit either. Inaction or choosing no politics can bring, as Rascal says, far-right sympathy that will attract a mob of bruised and confused egos who have proven historically susceptible to crypto-fascist talking points. AKA, I don't want that as my platform, nor do I ever care about building people like that for my platform. So if that's you watching this so far, then this isn't for you. But I understand the anti-consumerist ideas that they're talking about. And I understand the frustration how people can get to that point. People who actively agree and are right in Kotaku in action, the RPG site, and across other hobbies I don't want to associate with, but I understand how they get to that point. They fall in line because they are people who were either vulnerable or who realize that there's money to be made by grifting and by making rage bait content. People who stir up culture wars for the sake of profits, clicks, ad revenue, and outrage porn while benefiting financially off the division, I don't trust within any 10-foot pole. They are lost in the culture war thinking they're saving gaming by grifting when They believe the bomb-ass faggots and black and brown folk and disabled people in their games are the enemies. They see this amorphous, marginalized group as the enemy or as the people that are ruining the game, when that's not who's ruining your hobby. That's not who's ruining your game. The real enemy, the real issue comes down to company profits, company greed, and you guessed it, capitalism. No matter the corporate scandal or issue, functionally, a company's goal is to provide shareholder value. Mark Devins in Forbes' What is the Purpose of a Company specifically addresses the concerns and issues of being a company in 2020s. The major issue he addresses is how do shareholders, as well as other people who are important to a company, consumers, employees, get along. He talks about Business Roundtable. Business Roundtable is an association of more than 200 CEOs of America's leading companies. And this roundtable is an opportunity to discuss US economic and labor policy among CEOs and stakeholders relevant to them. Since 1972, BR has issued Principles of Corporate Governance. Corporate governance is the systems, rules, and practices by which a firm is controlled. For example, corporate governance can encompass most spheres of a company's management, such as performance measurements, to trying to build trust of all involved in the business, like investors, consumers, and public officials. So, a principle of corporate governance is a written out set of rules, strategies, and guidelines on how to organize and run a company. The purpose of a corporation is clear in their 1997 piece. The Business Roundtable wishes to emphasize that the principal objective of a business enterprise is to generate economic returns to its owner. Although the link between the forms of governance and economic performance is debated, the Business Roundtable believes that good corporate governance practices provide an important framework for a timely response by a corporation's board of directors to situations that may directly affect stockholder value. So, prior to 2019, the main point of a company was to provide value to stockholders. That statement was changed recently, specifically in 2019. But that logic, I think, still carries over even in an anniversary post by BR on August 16th, 2024. They discuss the updated Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of a corporation, which declares that companies should aim to deliver long-term value to all of their stakeholders, customers, employees, suppliers, the communities in which they operate, and their shareholders. That sentiment is further enforced by a future statement in the article. They, CEOs, concluded that statements should reflect their consensus that the best-run companies are focused on producing good products and services, providing fair compensation and excellent training to employees, creating mutually beneficial partnerships with suppliers, and taking care of the communities where they do business. In the long term, the interests of a company's stakeholders are inseparable. No single stakeholder will succeed unless they all do. This means a company's goals should align with every stakeholder while creating economic value. Nevin states this point as well. Running a successful company for the long term is not just about what the products, the profits, the financing, the sales, and marketing. It is as much about the how, decisions its leaders make, the way they engage with and treat their stakeholders of all types, the kind of cultures they build, the values they live, and the behaviors they will not tolerate, and the impact they have on the communities and society more broadly. Nevin believes the lack of trust in a company or CEO is an issue of leadership struggling to deal with multiple stakeholders in conflict. That businesses can't just be about business, but have taken into account other variables like socioeconomic factors. And to their credit, BR does go into great detail about the economic benefits that have arrived from BR and from new economic policy and labor policy. And I really do want to give them credit. There is a point there that they are trying to do good, right? I think some of them have good intention, I guess. But this sounds great on paper and in corporate conversation, but I find the premise to be bull crap. I believe profit and the well-being of others in a free market system won't ever align no matter how much we try to contort it or reform this system. I believe all humans deserve to live and succeed and be creative and to lead a life of meaning and dignity. I don't think you need to work hard and break your bones in order to live a meaningful life and sell your labor for thousands and thousands of hours, whether you are in the TTRPG space or D&D space, or whether you're in, say, STEM or in, say, science and mathematics, or any other field. None of us should have to work hours and hours to simply do the things we care about. And I think that idea should be translated over into tabletop RPG spaces and D&D spaces, where we play games wherever, however, and whoever we want without inaccessibility. We shouldn't have to deal with bigotry, financial burdens, and we should be able to be full human beings. Creatives of all kinds, from sensitivity readers, artists, writers, actors, podcasters, and so many more should be able to create and craft their art, passions, and businesses without financial, emotional, or physical risks to their bodies. But I don't believe BR or Nevin or anyone who is a corporate executive and or related to leadership strategy or business ethics. BR themselves have a history with lobbying for sharp reductions in corporate taxes, defeating antitrust bills, and blocking labor law reform pushed out by unions like AFL-CIO. And I am adamant on this because time and time again, the companies we opt into, both in the TTRPG space and outside, fail us, harm us, and create policies that clearly benefit a small margin. There is research to show that the main people who are able to influence policy and politics in the United States are companies or organizations and political elite. As stated in the abstract of Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, Interest Groups, and Average Citizens. A great deal of empirical research speaks to the policy influence of one or another set of actors, but until recently, it has not been possible to test these contrasting theoretical predictions against each other within a single statistical model. The results provide substantial support for theories of economic elite domination, for theories of biased pluralism, but not for theories of majoritarian electoral democracy, majoritarian pluralism. Translation is that the people who are influencing policy are not the quote-unquote average American. They're not working class people, they're not marginalized people. They're likely not even some of the small-knit right-wing grifters on the internet. They are political and economic elites who align themselves with companies, or they are directly companies. So I speak to this point that a company's goal is profit, and I think we can see that as companies shift from including DEI services and advertisements to actively being hostile, antagonistic, and removing those services, as we've seen in 2024 and starting in 2025. Calling a piece of media or industry or company woke does not address the fundamental truth that multi-million and billion-dollar companies and the people and shareholders that own them and work with them do not align with workers. I claimed earlier Google as being woke and being progressive, but obviously that was done for layering evidence on one another. Some examples include that there was a jury trial which is scheduled for August 2025 in U.S. District Court in San Francisco to Google. This claims that Google has been selling personal data to developers behind the consumer's back. The lawsuit concerns Google's Web and App Activity, WAA, and its settings, which gives privacy control to end users. However, the data is still sent to third-party developers through Google Analytics and Firebase. Ultimately, the claims indicate that Google, despite folks opting out of wanting their data sold, have their data sold and then used to make profit-driven decisions by companies. Back in August 2024, Google was determined to be a monopolist and that Google has monopoly power in general search services and general search text ads. While the case does not include any remedies, it should be deeply concerning for all of us. All of us participate in e-commerce and use Google services in some way. And it feels pretty anti-consumerist and anti-intellectual to hold a monopoly over search services, especially when Google search services have felt like they have deteriorated over time. Trust me, you are not the only one that feels like Google sucks now. Also, Google has matched donations to charities supporting Israeli soldiers and illegal settlements while there is a proven, ongoing genocide happening in Palestine. To add, Google has a cloud computing contract with the Israeli government called Project Nimbus. This project acts under an adjusted terms of services between Google and Amazon to provide the government and military with access to the state-of-the-art cloud and AI tools. So, how is a company that is anti-consumerist, anti-intellectual, and has many really bad allegations on them woke? Let's move on to Meta. While I didn't mention Meta prior, I want to address the biggest United States social media giant in question because it exists everywhere in the States, but also outside the US. There are people who use Meta and many of its services, and I want to address that for my international audience. One of the biggest scandals I can think of in the past couple of years is when Cambridge Analytica, a whistleblower, specifically Christopher Wiley, talked specifically on how the firm targeted users on Facebook with political advertising during and before the 2016 election. In a massive breakdown, Associated Press talks about Facebook's response to misinformation from 2016 to 2020. It's quite detailed, discussing Facebook back in 2017 publicly acknowledging government and state actors who influence national elections in the US and specifically with the UK dealing with Brexit. The tech company unveiled new security measures in 2019 and created a quote-unquote war room ahead of the UK elections in November 2018 to prepare for misinformation and to prepare for issues related to that. They eventually put restrictions even on QAnon groups and conspiracy movements in October 6, 2020. They eventually then banned all groups that supported QAnon. But I think that was all of them appealing to massive pressures in different political climate. As we can currently see, Meta has thrown away all of that nonsense in 2025 and even later parts of 2024, as they not only have removed their fact-checking program, they've loosened moderation on the platform, and amongst other companies have removed and or scaled back their diversity programs. Misinformation, rage-baiting content, and extreme content get people agitated and or excited, which leads to increased interaction, and thus more revenue, even if there are genuine and many concerns about the company's impact socially, economically, and even financially, not only on the politics side, but on the side of the people, especially the most marginalized who use these platforms. So, I don't think it's fair or smart to call Meta woke either. It was all set dressing due to social, economic, and political pressures, and that shifted when it was more economically advantageous for Mark Zuckerberg and the stakeholders to shift their position. Speaking of which, what are some companies that have announced scaling back of their diversity inclusivity program? There is McDonald's, Amazon, Walmart, Boeing, Molson Coors, remember that one? Lowe's, Ford, Brown-Forman Corporation, which is the owner of Jack Daniel, Harley Davidson, and John Deere. All of these companies have created DEI initiatives to promote equity in the workplace, but they were so easy to drop the program when the political climate changed and or the mounting backlash hurt their bottom line. There are companies I listed earlier that have a clear track record of anti-consumerist, union busting, and anti-privacy practices policies, yet are given the label of woke because a queer or trans person in their advert exists. I think it is clear that companies opted into these DEI programs during the 2020s or even before that, because DEI programs have existed since the 1960s. ERG programs have existed since the 1960s. Moving back to 2020, I focus on that because that was when George Floyd protests were occurring. And that's when companies started to shift their lens and put out DEI statements of support, because they wanted to make themselves seem inclusive and equitable. Now, there were and are companies that have actively hired, implemented programming, and created whole marketing campaigns to create this air of inclusivity. They wanted to sell you a product and saw that avenue as profitable. It's rainbow capitalism at its finest, for queer and trans people being seen as a target audience for an ad rather than as full humans. It is companies hiring union busters while also promoting racial equity in the same company as though this should be normalized. It is freaking bullshit. These companies and so many more talk out of their ass about supporting queer and trans people, about supporting disabled people, but when the going gets tough, when the political climate changes, they're easy to pull out their DEI initiatives, they're easy to remove these programming services, and they're very, very quick to lay off people despite them seeming like they were equitable. Is this to say that affinity groups, multicultural clubs, and programs like that are useless or never needed? Absolutely damn not. I have been part of employee resource groups, LGBTQ and marginalized clubs and activities, and also part of community service groups that have proven to be vital to my survival. Some of these clubs and activities, if I didn't have them when I had them, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have the community I have now, and I most certainly wouldn't be able to talk about this issue as extensively as I am now. I think there are genuinely good people with genuinely good intentions who run these services, and I do think they're providing a net benefit. Employee networks in 2006 state that affinity groups have existed since the 1960s, as I mentioned earlier, and their reasons for forming were multiple. It was to reduce costs associated with employee turnover, it was to improve absenteeism and low productivity, it could be to prevent isolation from the greater community and greater company culture. It also came out during the 1960s, which was the civil rights movement, which meant it was a response to the fervent white supremacist violence that Black folk and other marginalized groups were feeling across the United States and across the world. ERGs can also be places of learning and development. They can keep employees engaged in formal and informal learning opportunities between coworkers and supervisors. And there's research showing that ERGs are helpful in networking opportunities and improve career advancement outcomes for the people that participate. For students and academics, affinity groups can do a lot of good as well. Affinity groups can provide a space of building connection and mutual support among people. They also serve as a space for allies and comrades to learn about these issues and organize amongst these issues with each other. These group spaces can also address the fears of being tokenized. They can help legitimize events hosted by the organization and help with inclusive recruiting practices when multiple marginalized people are left out of these conversations on equity, on workplace violence, and on other issues that affect the most marginalized, but also those in positions of power and privilege. So I think affinity groups at any setting, whether academic, professional, personal, community-based, provide spaces for people to come together to learn and produce better and higher quality work. So I do think that these services are a net benefit, as I've said. However, they are unfortunately not indispensable. Companies have clearly shown that they're okay removing them because they only remove them when it doesn't serve the stakeholders' value, when the political climate changes. They have no backbone. Now, I also think that affinity groups are not and should not be the end-all be-all. We should be able to provide material needs and material goods to those who are marginalized, because at the end of the day, it's cool to be in a LGBTQ club or a GSA, but if I don't have food on my table, if I don't have a place to sleep, if I don't have access to clean drinking water, if I don't have access to medication, then I'm screwed. So affinity groups provide a safe space to talk about these issues, but they should not be the end all and be all. Now, I think I'm getting into another topic and such another conversation. So if you want me to talk more about affinity groups and or how they might relate to tabletop RPG spaces, let me know down below in the comment section. Okay, so I've broken down my philosophy on company goals, what is wokeness, a discussion on affinity groups. I'm sure some of you are thinking, how the hell does any of this have to do with Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop games? The point is that Dungeons & Dragons, and more specifically Hasbro, is a microcosm of the entire conversation we have talked about in this video. On one part of the spectrum, you have people calling WOTC and DnD woke. The latest issue is a response to DnD's change of races to now be species. Of course, this is just one example. The conversation of whether or not this company is woke or not has been traced back way earlier, and I'm not going to get into that. What is important is to see how the anti-woke crowd has responded. There are titles for videos calling woke D&D did it again, or blog posts stating that confirmed D&D got woke, going broke. There is a Daily Mail article titled Dungeons & Dragons gets woke makeover that acts as key term and introduces trigger warnings. And this goes on and on and on, and you can see on the screen the many examples that exist on Dungeons & Dragons and from other creators. Like with any other company, they make decisions with the intention of profit. While I do think there are well-intended people in WOTC, and I do think there are well-intended folks who want to genuinely bring joy to D&D enjoyers and tabletop enjoyers, the company did this largely because of profit. New York Times article discussing the decisive changes mentions WOTC's reasons for them. Alongside a cultural shift, there was a financial incentive. The changes to Dungeons & Dragons, which gamers commonly call D&D, may fit into the corporate world's pursuit of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But they're also part of a financial strategy for Wizards of the Coast. Players responded tepidly to the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons in 2008, when the game was more punchline than a blockbuster movie premise. The Big Bang Theory was not yet television's highest rated comedy, and the cultural phenomenon Stranger Things, whose 1980s characters are fluent in D&D jargon, was years in the future. The D&D audience was shrinking, said Jeremy Crawford, the game's lead rules designer. He added, the game was becoming so tailored to just one way of playing that it was not feeling as inviting as we knew the game could be. So you can clue in that their decision to change this was so that they could market to the widest audience possible, which has always been WOTC's end goal. Why do you think there are so many player-specific material? It's because they want to sell as much product to as many people, and who would have guessed it, there are more players than game masters. They saw the difficulties of previous editions and adapted so they could advertise 2024 PHP to the widest range of people. Now, there isn't much data to show if the sales for 2024 editions PHP are higher than the ones for 2014, and I'm not going to get into that. That's not the point of this video. Regardless if they're making more money or less money, the company, and to the extent Hasbro, will continue to make decisions that support them financially, even if they seem super crappy. And as we know, Hasbro and WOTC are known for their crappy decisions. We get to be talking about the whole debacle with the OGL back in 2023. There was the massive issue of WOTC sending private investigators, Pinkertons, to a creator's home, which was a terrible PR issue, and it also just made the company look really bad. There is the VML issue, which I've heard recently. VML is a community of Magic players of marginalized genders who run competitive league and or organized play events for Magic Gathering. Wizards announced to VML recently that Wizards will no longer support the VML program with funding, which makes it impossible for the league to continue. Some others are Hasbro's Christmas layoffs in 2024 were particularly disturbing. They laid off just less than 1/3 of the company's entire labor force between the 800 earlier last year and then 1,100 in December 2024. These layoffs included IT staff, presenters, game designers, artists, and even financial members of the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons team. Finally, Hasbro recently announced a partnership with Games Global. Games Global is a local supplier of iGaming content. The company's first collaboration is slated for Q1 of 2025 and is named Dungeons & Dragons Tales of Riches. The company news page states that this is to diversify its branded content portfolio as it continues to deliver premium games that offer players uniquely memorable experiences. It's corporate jargon to say they're trying to make more money because they want to diversify their brand. For context, iGaming content is short for internet gaming. This refers to a wide range of online gambling games. This involves betting, casino games, poker, sports betting, and so many more. So to summarize, massive multi-million-dollar companies like Meta, Amazon, Walmart, and so forth are not woke. They make adverts, marketing campaigns, articles, and even affinity groups, unfortunately, for revenue. They do it because they want to decrease recidivism, retain their bottom line, and appear charitable and socially equitable while racking in a fair position to their consumer bases. This is all to generate revenue. And I do remain critical of these companies, but I also greatly believe that affinity clubs and ERGs are a boon. Affinity spaces provide a space of comfortability and growth. However, the company will discard these programs and the people who relied on this sense of community eventually when it's not in line with, say, greater global politics or not in line with the company's goals for profit. Meanwhile, right-wingers and centrists benefit by fueling endless culture wars and calling these companies woke and blaming it on the most marginalized because it makes them money. And unfortunately, this cycle rinses and repeats with unfortunate consequences like harassment campaigns to some people. And D&D sits in all of that. D&D is a microcosm. And specifically, Hasbro is not this bastion of wokeness or woketopians or whatever word they want to use or claim. While I do think there are individuals and fans and communities and clubs and groups who create 5th edition content and material and homebrew with amazing good intent, we have to understand that these dragons, whether Meta or Hasbro, want to build wealth at the expense of anyone and everyone. They may sanitize their words with corporate language, but fundamentally, tabletop role-playing games will not get better by solely relying on endless culture wars and corporate greed. It is a cycle that I think will hurt the most marginalized and then spread from there, and quite frankly, that shit sucks. While in this entire video, I give this air of hopelessness, this feeling that there really isn't anything we can do, I don't want to end on that note, nor do I believe that. I think it would be careless to end on hopelessness when people in the TTRPG space have always been creating, writing, and developing games in communities that come from the heart. So I try to create some actionable steps as just an individual in the space. 1. Create, write, or produce the game, actual play, or passion that you want for the community. Do this with care and with love. Do this with every fiber of your brain, your heart, and your nerves. Do this with desperation, excitement, fear, anger, and every other human emotion. It's okay if it's unfinished or messy. While I am highly critical of Gary Gygax and many of the others of the pioneers of the TTRPG community, remember, the art in the original books was amateurish. Why aim for an impossibility that is perfection when you can just make something that you believe is true to you? If you have passion for something and you want to make it, then do it. Secondly, put your money, time, and labor into people, products, and organizations that will foster the community you want. That means donate and spend your money to support the creatives you want. Obviously, creating TTRPGs, actual plays, and any of their content is a lot of work. Editing, writing, art, marketing, and so much more cost money. So if you can and you want to, support these products financially. And obviously, if you cannot, leave a review, collaborate with them, share their creative work, don't use AI. There are so many things you can do to support a creative or support particular people in the space. Word of mouth and genuine connection over a game or a piece of media or a podcast makes a big difference. Oftentimes, people learn about games through just going to conventions or through hearing their friends talk about it. So openly talk about your favorite games. This also means being conscious of how you engage with content on the internet, not only for tabletop role-playing games, but overall. Don't try to give engagement or clicks or follows to institutions, companies, people, or anyone that clearly turned their back on the marginalized, that have treated people horribly. Now, activism and the work that comes towards is hard. You have to give up something. So I personally say spend your money where and how you think is responsible. If you don't have the money, there's other opportunities as well. Volunteer your time and labor to contribute to a project. That could mean volunteering or participating in a podcast that you really are interested in. That could be participating in an actual play that has open casting. Find that community and cultivate it. Speaking of which, that's number 3. Be an active community member in the space. This can allow for you to bounce creative ideas off of each other and let you talk about your frustrations, your worries, and your projects even. I think this is especially helpful for folks in the TTRPG space looking for a specific community. For instance, maybe you want to play games in a predominantly Black or Asian American space. Then look for those spaces that contribute to the best of your ability to the communities and to the RPG space. That could also mean like going to a mutual aid organization. That could mean joining a local community center. That could mean joining or forming a union at your workplace. If possible, create the community in person or online that you want to see for yourself, but also for others. Cultivation also means not letting in bad actors. There are and should be spaces for folks to disagree. We learn best when we discuss our differences, tactics, approaches, and just how we experience life. This could be discussing how different tabletop RPG systems highlight different player experiences. This could be talking about specific game design. This could be talking about maybe, say, tabletop history, or it could be an influence or inspiration you got from your favorite medium. But that does not mean letting clear bad actors and folks who are okay with bad actors into your space. This means remove people who mean and want to do harm and or have a huge track record with no indication of change. And fourthly, rinse, repeat, and adapt. And with that, that's all I have. I thought about how to end this video, and quite frankly, I don't have a succinct ending with some sort of narrative climax. I don't have that, but I do know that falling into hopelessness doesn't feel right for me. I get it. I understand to feel hopeless when companies, institutions, and people clearly fail you. I understand when you're gaslighted into thinking that you're the crazy one for wanting to just simply be who you are and not being treated like absolute garbage. But I realize that I can't convince people of my humanity who never cared about it. I can't convince companies who never really cared about me that I matter. But I know who does matter. The people in my tabletop RPG community, the folks that I spend community with in real life, and all the people that know me. They matter. And if my games, if my conversations, and if my videos impact people, then I'll keep doing that. And if you think that's a worthy fight, let me know down below in the comment section. With that, I'm your average everyday queer, blurty nerd, blurty disposition. Hope you all have an awesome Black History Month. Ciao.